I responded to your tweet because I've been using VBT for almost a year and a half now, and
Yeah, no. Yeah.
we use Vitruve, so we
Mhm.
use an LPT.
Yeah.
I know that every device is different. You know, now that worked, I've been able to get my hands on multiple things, but I
Yeah.
wanted to just let you speak on what what's so valuable of like you're asking like how people are using it, and if you want me to
Right.
explain a little more detail of what I meant by what I said
Yeah.
to kind of give you an idea.
Yeah. Start with what are you doing now?
Got it.
It's
So in the beginning, we just started getting used to the workflow and using it and understanding what
right.
it meant. And for the most part, all I'm using is average velocity. Like I'm just using
Right.
mean velocity, not using peak at the moment. And I wanted a system that incentivized our kids to try to give more intent. So that was like number one, right? There's a lot of
Brilliant.
people who use the just feedback of VBT, but they don't capture it, right?
I
Like,
know.
oh, I
Yeah.
saw that. Oh, I can go, but then it just goes away. Okay, that's
Right.
valuable. That's step one. Well, we capture it. So,
Right.
and then most of the time, about 95% of the time, you're doing more than one rep in a set.
Right.
So,
Yep.
in order for us to make decisions on lower weight, same weight, or more weight, is definitely just going to be based off of the set averages. So,
Right.
like if we're doing triples, most of the time, if your velocities are all over the place, it's a inconsistency from technique. So that's another
Right.
feedback tool of like, hey, if it's jumping all over the place, if you're lifting something pretty taxing, it may have a natural like, first rep's going to be fast, second rep's a little bit slower, third rep a tad
Sure.
slower. Or if you have something like deadlift, where usually your first rep is slow, mostly because the body is primed after that first
Sure.
rep. It's ready. It gets a little
Yeah.
better, right?
Potentiation.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's
This
all
is
we're
good,
starting to
man.
do. Yeah. So we
I'm
look at it, and I asked. So the first conversation I had about VBT about like in a team setting was with Dave Ballou at Alabama.
right.
And Dave told us his system was like the reason why he built his Sorinex racks with these massive monitors on it because they have elite form. So
Yeah.
where they could all see each other's speeds with like, massive fonts where everybody could see and compete.
Yeah.
And they're trying
Leaderboard.
to, yeah, and they're trying to drive their athletes to want to put more weight on the bar. So I experimented with that concept and came upon this. So instead of giving like, because what a lot of people may see in VBT may see speed ranges from 0.75 to 1.0 or 1.0 to 1.2, speed strength, streak speed, or however you want to categorize it.
Right.
But to me, I thought that range was way too wide for me personally. So what
Yep.
I decided to do was is if I really wanted to be within like a 0.10 range, I just give my athletes a floor. So like if I wanted to see peak power, uh what I found from, and I'm just talking like squat. Let's just use squat as the example.
Right.
Uh, somewhere between 0.80 and 0.90 meters per second mean velocity was going to give me that. So
Brilliant.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I was like, all right, guys, 0.80 is your floor, right? If you're between 0.80 and 0.90, you're in the right range as long as you're giving maximum intent.
Right.
If your set average gets to 0.91, so you're 10 above the floor, that's a bump in 5 pounds. So for high schoolers, if you did 10 points over,
Right.
5 pound add. And that's not very much just because of the skill level of some of my athletes, a 5 pound jump can be a lot.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
yeah. But with some of my advanced kids, like some of my juniors and seniors that have been training with me for 2 or 3 years, that may be a 10 pound bump for them because they can handle it.
Sure.
And then on the flip side, as far as going down, right? If the kid's not, if they've missed their floor, so if 0.80 is what we're looking for and they're 0.75, I usually try to give them a one more set to, hey, just lock in, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that. But if you miss it two in a row, there's a consequence. You got to drop 10 pounds automatically.
Yeah. I
So,
love it.
so that's like the on the floor auto regulation piece. And to me, that's super important. Now,
Because you're
where
high
do,
school. I just
yeah,
want the people listening that if it's one of mine that they need to know your population. That's brilliant. Because a lot of people will say, "Oh, you don't need it for high school," and I totally disagree. They might need it more.
I
So to
agree.
keep them safe, you know.
Yeah. So how I use it with middle schoolers too is that we use it it's easy for kids to follow rules if it's pretty non-negotiable and you can't dispute it, right?
Right.
If a kid, because, the danger of a middle school kid, you think, wanting to go too heavy and getting themselves hurt. Sure.
Right.
So for us, like we put a cap, like you're not allowed to move anything slower than 0.65 meters per second.
Bri- Brilliant.
And that's it. I
Is
mean,
that is
period.
that for all your is that just middle school or
Just
is
middle
that
school. That's a middle
right?
school governor. Yeah. High school,
Right.
we'll get as low as 0.30. Like we'll get there,
Well,
Yeah.
you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, but for middle school is like, I need to accumulate like quality reps. So
Yes.
that's a governor. So remember, velocity is just a measurement to give you information to make better decisions. It's not a method.
Exactly.
People think it's a method. It's not a
I
method.
know they think it's like the dynamic effort. They think West Side Barbell, speed work and like it's whatever work you're doing. Like
Right.
so,
Now, question I got for you, coach. Now
yeah.
that you've kind of heard that piece, which that's like on the floor, auto regulation is like where it's kind of step one.
Right.
What's the next step in value from using velocity data?
I don't know I don't know the true that well, so I can't like. There's the things that we would use for high school kids would be a bar path because you can
Okay.
even overlay it with a video if you want to get buy-in. So for me, especially weightlifting, I need them to see what I'm seeing and understand it because a lot of times when it's such detail in sport of weight, this wouldn't go for all high school athletes, but for weightlifting, this minute details. But even with my football players that I coach now, just to get those teenage boys to understand what I'm saying because they're like, well, I feel this, and I'm like, well, feel is arbitrary. So this is what's happening. So it gets buy-in. Eccentrics, we use it big time, to ensure like the eight, accentuated eccentric loading. Dr. Sukamel is my guy. Like he's got you guys can Google him and you'll see some really good methods for AEL. So we use it to measure that. We use it exactly what you're talking. We will see what you're doing. Like the 0.8 to 0.9 is brilliant because like where I want, see, sometimes kids won't maximize their power at 0.8 and it's not a good thing. So
Right.
it could be 0.7 and then it becomes less functional because like, with power just being a combination of velocity and force, like if you're maxing your power at more of a force, emphasized rate, then it won't be able to be used on a field. But like the 0.8, there was a study, Brian Mann was a part of it. Plus he also cites, I forget the study, but just Google Brian Mann and power. But 0.8 is evidently the sweet spot. And for like most of the time, it's around 60% is what you want. And so, but the thing is if you train that, here's my point, is because you train at 0.8 to 0.9, it will be your transfer, like when you do something, like one of the specific transfers from what you're doing in the gym and what you might do on the field is the rate. So if you emphasize 0.8, if you were the guy who was like maxing power at 0.7, you will slowly become a 0.8, which is perfect for football, like linebackers. And so what you're doing is brilliant, like that point, because like it'll be specific. So
Right.
you'll make all of your athletes emphasize power at 0.8, which is it's power that you can use, like,
Right. So that's, to me, that's kind of what we look at on the back end for data is, all right, where is peak power happening for each athlete? And
right.
you can kind of start bucketing athletes of, are you muscularly driven, right? Do you have like, are you more of a slow force emphasized or a fast force? It's kind of the way that I like to look at it. Hunter Eisenhower, who's at Arizona State basketball, has kind of coined that term now. Instead of using the word strength and power, like, because like strength to me is such an arbitrary, ambiguous
Yeah,
term.
it's
So
force at whatever rate you want. It's
that's
not
right. It's
yeah,
strong everywhere. Like, because to me,
right,
power is strength. It's just strength in this time.
right,
So once you can kind of see where that's at, you can bucket. The next question is what about intervention? So like if you see a kid that's a lot more muscularly or more on the slow force where power happens and they just can't, maybe it's their rate coding, their signaling's not there, right? Something that's not there to be able to move this amount of weight fast enough on the velocity side of that equation for power. a lot of times it's like you just have to train specificity for
Right.
that. You have to
Right.
learn to go fast.
Right.
Yeah,
So
that's what I'm thinking.
we measure the dynamic strength index with gym wearers, so we do
Yeah.
like a
Can
counter
you break
movement
that?
jump.
Can you break that
Yeah,
down for those that are listening?
sure. So like, you get your peak force doing something heavy, like, and normally preferably doing something that's similar as the explosive movement you're going to do. So you got to have a absolute strength movement, say squat, trap bar deadlift, whatever camp
Right.
you're in. And you can do concentric only jumps, or like I prefer to do a counter movement jump with a squat is what I prefer. And you don't even have to max because like, most of the time DSI was developed, you would get your max power from a isometric pull, which is not specific really to like a counter movement. So you're not looking at the stretch shortening cycle or anything. So, but getting it from a squat, and what we do is we work up to like a 0.4. We start like a bar and
Right.
go up slowly. You need like 4 to 5 attempts to get what I'm about to say. And so, but we stop at 0.4, but then we have then we estimate what your true 1RM is based on the movement. Like for squatting, it's normally around 0.3. And so for deadlifting, it's slower. And if you're a world-class powerlifter, like if you're strong like I was, you can move a squat at 0.1 something, but
Right.
you don't want them to be able to do that. So, but the point is then you estimate what their 1RM would have been in the squat. Then I do like this, regression to see what would the force have peaked out at as well as compared to the explosive movement. So your counter movement jump. That's easy because you just do a max. You do 2 to 3 counter movement jumps with a very specific warm up. Make sure it's always the same so you don't get variance, and then you compare it. And so you take the counter movement jump force, peak force, divided by the absolute strength peak force. And so it's normally like it's the between 0.6 to 0.8 is what I would call perfectly powerful.
Okay.
If it's above 0.8, they need to get strong. That means they're almost using every bit of force capability they have to do something explosive. So therefore, they need to get strong. If on the other hand, they're one of these that people that lead towards strong and they're super strong but not very fast, so that would be below 0.6.
Okay.
If they're that, then you totally work on like speed, like you were saying. Then you would just do jumps, squats even an even higher rate. So that's it. Those are the 3 categories. I also do not to get, I don't want to confuse them, but we do a reactive strength index, which is a
Yeah.
drop jump where you look at the time on the ground, contact time, and height. So you divide the height by the contact time. And so then I can, the DSI gives me everything I know, but that might give me more clues about why. Like, is it their elasticity? Is it their nervous system? So it gives me just more clues.
Right.
But you could really, at high school, you could just do the DSI, just a explosive movement and a strength movement and look at how they rate. And there's an article I have. It's about
Yeah.
index with velocity too. So,
Yeah.
but you can just do that, and then you can divide it into 3 groups because the struggle you have is you have hundreds of people, and so you can't individualize completely, but you can get pretty darn close. And at high school level, in my experience, close is all you need.
So try to make it as simple as possible for DSI, because I think that's a really good test,
Yep.
because most people are going to be doing squatting heavy in their program at some point, and then
Right.
some programs are going to be jumping and measuring a jump at
Right.
some point.
Right.
Now, if they don't have it, in order to calculate DSI, do you need VBT?
Yeah, because you need the rate. Or you need a force plate.
Okay, got it.
You would, because otherwise you're just guessing and like,
Sure. Well, I
and to
mean, a lot
get,
of people don't have that technology,
I
so
know
that's
they
why I was
do.
just
I know
curious.
that. Well, that's a great question, Cody. I'm gonna think about that, but it would just be like, I'm sure you could come up with their max squat
Right.
versus their vertical. Matter of fact, I will work on that. It's a great question and see.
Because like if you go into that question with the understanding that it's not the best case scenario already, so you
Right,
know you're getting an estimate in the first place.
right,
Imagine if you got, as long as you could control for standards, so like squat distance or squat depth or squat standard.
right.
Um, if you work up to a max, maybe there's an assumed speed that if a kid's going really heavy, it's not going to
Yeah,
be, you can at least give a range maybe, and then I don't know,
yeah.
somehow you
I'm
can
guessing.
calculate
Right. I'm
that.
guessing it would be once you could squat 1.7 to 2 times body weight, then should focus on something else type thing. Like um, but that's a guess. There's all the people that, who knows, like, how there was a study done that it appeared that 1.7 was all that someone needed to maximize, force when they're doing something explosive, but
Well,
it wasn't a good
Dr.
study. But
Ray, right?
yeah,
Matt Ray said that after 1.7, that there's a big diminishing return of how much squat strength is going to aid in
right.
speed performance. That
I
doesn't
would
make it not
say,
important.
yeah, I would just say that's an arbitrary comment. No, I mean, like, I think it's the individual, Cody.
Right.
Like some people, like, with working with weightlifters, because that's all we're looking at is how much of their force are they using for power. That's the whole sport. And it's some people, like, for every pound they add to their squat or kilogram, like they add to their ability to produce power. Some people is not the case. And almost all of them would be above the two times body weight. And so
Right.
I think it depends on the person, is what I'm saying.
100%.
There is that guy who just can, like, I had this guy named Nathan Damron. He squatted 705.
He's an
That's
absolute unit. I remember seeing
units.
videos of
Yeah.
Nathan. Yeah.
And, but it did not, it stopped adding to his ability to produce high rate power. So like, but it was fun. So like for him, it would have been what you said right there was probably true for Nathan.
Right.
But this guy, Tom Suma, definitely wasn't, like, and it never did get to that point. It just always, he could use, I think it has a lot to do with how you're built too, how you're wired, but it's not as simple as saying that.
Yeah.
Maybe in general, but
Well,
like,
I did a case study last off season with our football program, and this is really what helped open my eyes. Was at an offensive lineman who is now, he just signed with Tulane. He's 6'4", 285,
dear God.
can run 20 miles an hour. He's a very good athlete, but like his bench press for a high school kid, for a high school Division I offensive lineman, was 290, and like you think. Like, that's not like, you would think a kid like that would be stronger. And sometimes in high
Yeah.
school coaches' eyes, they go,
Mm-hmm.
that's not that strong. And I'm like, okay. But we ran with VBT, the power of VBT. This is where my analytical mind went. I thought, okay, if I can, because the whole goal for me was I wanted to find a way to estimate good training loads without necessarily having to take everything to a max at all
Totally
times.
agree.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
like if I look at minimum velocity threshold of whatever we're going to count as the slowest
Right.
we're allowed to count. So for a bench press, I go 0.30.
Yeah.
And
That's really good because it fails, like 0.1 something,
right.
even for a high school athlete. So
Sure.
that's
So I
heavy
use,
enough.
right. I use that, and that's the number he got 290 at. And you think that
Oh,
now if people use percentages, a lot, velocity and percentages have a linear relationship, but it's
yeah.
not exactly linear. I figured
No,
this out.
no.
So I was like, all right, well, if I know that, at 0.30 is 290, and I know that 0.80 is around 60% or whatever, right?
Right.
50% or 60%. If I do the math, right, I'm going to do it right here on my phone. I don't remember off the top of my head, but points like, that's like 100. That means that he should be able to move that peak power around at 175 for a bench press. But
Beautiful.
Travis,
Yeah.
he peak powered. He could move 205 at 0.80. He
Then
was, so he's explosive. That's why I was like, do
this
you
is
not
all
see
matters.
why he's throwing guys around on the
Yeah.
field? Now, this is where things really took a turn for me. I started to thinking about the dynamic effort maximum max effort type of approach from powerlifting or Louis Simmons or
Right.
whoever.
Yeah.
I thought this. And tell me if I'm wrong, because you are in the
Sounds like you're
powerlifting
on it.
world. Is
Yeah.
that for power lifters, their sport is to lift heavy totals. So they use the dynamic effort method
Right.
to increase their max strength. That's why they use it. That's why
Yeah.
it's there to it's a nervous system
Right.
driver. That's a missing hole to increase their total. What
Yeah,
about
because it improves rate coding, rate of force development. Yeah,
that's
exactly.
right. But what if we flop that for field and court sport athletes, that we should only drive strength as long as power's going up? So like
Agreed.
it's the opposite. So you only train power to make sure strength goes up for power lifters,
Right.
but for high school, not high school, but for field and court sport athletes, it doesn't mean you shouldn't keep. But if you keep training strength and power keeps going up, you don't stop until it does. And once
Right.
it does,
Right.
you only touch it enough to make power continue going up. And the only way but then you get to that more advanced point to where in order for power to go up, specificity must come into play. At least that's from my experience.
Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah.
So that's why it's so valuable at some point pushing the 1RM for field and court sport athletes seems to have so much energy and time put into, you're playing with change plates at this point. I heard Tim Riley say that the other day. No, it wasn't Tim Riley. It was Corey Schlesinger on a podcast say, like, once we're fighting for change plates, like, I don't know how much for field and court sport athletes, right? Not necessarily strength athletes, but
even I think it would be for Olympic weightlifters as well.
yeah,
that's exactly what I do. Yeah, when it stops adding to his ability to produce power at a very high rate, and like Ryan, I'm a lifter, and so yeah, we went heavy once in 4 years on squats one time, and that was totally just for fun,
wow.
And we didn't go to a max like he did. He weighs he's a 73 kilo, so he weighs 160 pounds, and he squatted 605 high bar,
Good gracious.
and then I just cut it off, and it was still high rate. It was like it's in the 0.3s. So I mean, it was getting close, but for him, he could probably go to the 0.2s. So which I don't want him to be. So we cut it off. But yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, what's the point? Like, even for a weightlifter, like, and that's one thing a lot of the weightlifters don't get. But I will say this: the guy who's going to the Olympics, his dad gets it. I totally just went Hampton Morris. He's the best weightlifter in American history. Set a senior world record, and they focus on. They'll see them using bands with their squats. They always use velocity, and so he's worked on producing a power at a higher rate, and so he does it to maximum squatting is like arbitrary. It's matter of fact, it's counter. I would even say it would be counter, especially for field like a thrower. I think if you start really pushing the 1RMs more and more, I think it's counterproductive. So
interesting. Yeah, that's interesting to know. So let me ask you this then. Just from a pure, because like I know you've really dove headfirst into data and statistics because of your PhD studies and all of that. If you were to tell a high school coach, like any high school strength coach or anybody running a weight room, just from a data collection standpoint, like, and remember, sometimes technology is not available.
Yeah.
I hear so many coaches talk about how they struggle to collect data. Because to me, that's like the heartbeat of your program to know what's going on. If you were to tell a coach, like, all right, what data points would you collect for like a high school football team? Like when you had like bare bones equipment, like you've got a good weight room, but you might not have tech.
Right. Then I would do this. If you don't have tech, I would look at your however you want to do your 1RM squat, but like at least get a good guesstimate of their 1RM compared to their vertical leap then, because anyone can test that. If you got a wall and some chalk, you can test your vertical. And like when the explosive movement stops moving, then it's pointless to keep getting heavier. And so then you focus on explosion.
Yeah. So is there, I guess I would like to look at that data too, from like the comparison from, are you looking at it from, okay, you get a baseline number, like 1RM baseline, vertical jump baseline, and then you watch both of those metrics grow. And then a lot of times with high school kids, especially early, it's both going to grow just because they're so undertrained.
They're a newbie. Yeah. So they get all these neural adaptations. Yeah.
Right. But at some point, if we see 1RM continuing to creep, but vertical not really going anywhere, and body mass staying the same because body mass
Yeah.
matters. Because
Totally
so there's
matters.
another one. Body weight. Why aren't we collecting body weight?
I don't
Right.
know. We do.
Yeah.
We monitor body weight even for high school athletes every single week. Like I make them get on a scale with me to see it.
Yeah.
So
We
totally.
we know because the body mass is the force is relative to mass as well. Yeah.
Relative strength, man. That's more important than anything we're talking about. Like how
Yeah.
well can a human being move their body? Because that's sport. They don't have a barbell on their back when they're playing football or basketball. It's the body. So yeah,
If
you
you
got to
use a relative strength metric, so that to me, I know there's two ways to do it, and I don't know which one you may use, or at least to my knowledge. Like 1RM just divided by mass in it, that's like a strength index.
sure.
But the Brian Mann, I believe, had the other one that gives you like a coefficient that's supposed to regulate for body mass across the board. So it's 1RM divided by body weight to the 2/3 power. Is that right?
I mean, I think so. We don't do that. Like
No.
I look at like the relative strength, like literally like from a unilateral squat, like a true and like a pistol squat, or their inability to do one and a pull up. I think a pull up with it was even what's the guy's name? I'm totally blanking out, but he Parisi Sports wasn't Bill Martin Rooney. He's the one who told me like because he's produced tons of like first round draft picks and like top speed numbers for the combine, and he said that the number of pull ups someone could do strict was a pretty darn good correlation to how fast they're going to go. Which it's just they move their body well,
Yeah.
So,
So the tough part we get with relative strength in high school is just from looking at, like, because I want to be able to show coaches, like
mhm,
I'm in a dogfight to show coaches like why data is important. So
totally.
like from a relative strength standpoint, to me it feels like it should scale from light guys to heavy guys. Does that make sense? Because like
It should.
if you have a
It should.
280-pound guy, right, you're not going to ask him
Right.
to squat,
No.
five, whatever that is, over
Yeah.
500 pounds in high school in order to
Right.
be considered strong.
Right.
Right. But if you got a kid that's, 170 pounds, right, it's not out of the question for them to eventually squat 315. Right.
No,
It's really
not at all.
not at all. Like
No.
that's pretty strong. And that's that creeping up on that 1.7, 1.8 to two times body weight. But is it just something you have to get a knack for? Like you just got to look at the numbers and see, because like trying to tell a coach, like evaluating your linemen versus evaluating your skill players
Yeah.
just from a relative strength standpoint may look different.
Well, we use a T score. So like, like with you could too, like you get so many athletes, like you could just compare them to each other and you could do like, linemen, backs, receivers, and you could just compare them. I think what you said with Brian Mann, I'm sure if it's from Brian Mann, it's a good, it's a good coefficient. So,
Sure.
but
So
that would
when
be
you
simple
say
too.
T score, so from what I understand, so you've got Z scores and T scores. So
Right.
from a Z score standpoint, that's like from 0 is 50th percentile, and then 1 point is one standard deviation above or -1. But a T
Right.
score gives it to you in more of like a percentile readout. Is that right?
Yeah. How you are ranked compared to everybody else.
Okay.
Yes. It's a
Yeah.
percent. All they
Yeah.
do, I just think is times. It's almost like, if I'm not mistaken, it's like you times the Z score by 100 or something. They're pretty close. It's just easier to tell your admin, your AD, like a percent versus like some coefficient. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure. Some random number,
right.
0.65. What does that mean? Yeah.
Yeah. But
So
if I said he's 75%, that gives them an idea. Or if I say he's in the 99th percentile, he's your guy, So like,
right.
yeah,
Now, but if you compared it to everybody else, like for example, if you had squat, usually your heavier guys are going to squat higher. Like I may have a
right.
skill guy who's technically strong, but on his T score compared to everybody else, he's going to be in the 60th percentile. And that
Sure.
doesn't read out strong.
No,
Do you,
compare
do you,
them to the same people, to the
let's say, do you
backs.
look at
Yeah,
body weight classes,
you
or
could. Yeah,
yeah, that's a way to
200
do it.
above,
Yeah.
250, like maybe 200 to 250, 250 above. And then, you could definitely do that. Like,
Yeah.
I guess it's really endless. It depends on the coach and how much time. what takes them the least amount of time, because they're busy. You guys are busy. You have hundreds of athletes every single day, like
But you would
whatever you
still
can get
say
done.
that this data is important though, right?
Very important,
So
more crucial. Yeah, I would
so
say that's crucial.
if it's crucial, but also at the same time, a lot of times coaches at the high school level wear many hats. Time is of
Right.
the essence. Like, how do you still collect that data really well, even though like, so do you have to choose, or do you try to get
Ah,
something that handles that data for you?
I would if you can. The thing is like, are we talking about, somebody with an endless budget? Or are we talking about most high school coaches who, like in North Carolina, it's bare bones, man. Those guys I feel like we're way behind
Okay, so
in our
this
high
is
school
what's funny.
programs.
So what I don't understand on the monetary standpoint, and you're a businessman too, so it's easy
Yeah.
to understand. Like, okay, I make this analogy with football coaches. Coaches, you like, in order for you, like, I try to make this analogy from the field to the weight room, and it blows coaches'
Right.
minds. If all you had at the end of a game was that you won or lost, and that's all that was gonna give you information to prepare your team for the next week, would that be enough information? The answer is
Yeah.
absolutely not.
I
It
mean,
wouldn't. You need the film. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You need the film to
the
watch
details.
individual reps,
Right.
right? What went well, and then you start picking up on patterns of where your team is strong, where your team is weak, right? And the concepts that you do, and then against the concepts you play against. Okay, same concept. But in order for you to break that film down with speed, you have software like Huddle. Okay. You have no qualms
Right.
forking out the money for Huddle because you already see the immense value of how it helps you prepare. Do you
But you
think
won't
that some
spend
coaches
yeah.
don't understand the value for the weight room because the weight room's value is indirect to the sport, and Huddle is a direct value to the sport because it's literally tracking the sport itself? But if you have something like an AMS or a team builder
Yeah.
or something along those lines, why would coaches not want to? Everybody wants to say we don't we don't have the budget. I just think you don't see the value, because like
That's it.
you'll fork
Yeah.
out $6,000 or whatever for Huddle. I don't even know what the figure is, but
But
you
we
can't
got to
pay
be
a
able to
really
tell
nice AMS
them.
costs $2,500 a year. Like a place to store and collect and visualize data.